welcome to another episode of GovTech Today. I'm Russell Lowry.
And I'm Jen Seha.
And together we're going to try and bridge the gap between .gov and .com. Today we're going to talk about terms and conditions, the exciting contractual world of terms and conditions. Why don't we first just give the audience a baseline understanding of what T&Cs are, and then we'll talk about it in the context of a few different contracts and see how it works.
So, I mean, this is not our first time talking about terms and conditions. And when you look at government contracting, the terms and the conditions are always very onerous, overwhelming, excessive, but it's a function of government contracting in general. The whole point of terms and conditions is to mitigate risk to the government.
Right. And so that risk, and I have to be honest, as a small value add reseller, the fact that large companies won't take on risk is a business opportunity for my company, because people will sign up because give it to Mikey, he'll eat anything.
Yeah.
We will take on the risk. We look at our partners, we have insurance, but we're willing to take on that risk. How does that pervert, you think, the bid process that the state's going through?
I mean, it's part of the reason that a reseller channel exists, is because if I am a Fortune 500 company and a government is asking me to sign over the entire value of my company for, I mean, some of these contracts are huge, but they're not in the context of I'm a multi-billion-dollar company. They just won't do it. They can't do it. They cannot put themselves. Big companies are very risk averse too, as we learn when we try to deal with them. So getting through, an Oracle or an IBM or a Microsoft's legal department, getting their attorneys to okay accepting risk is also very challenging. So you have this sort of collision of two entities that do not want to accept any risk, and you've got Mikey in the middle that says, I'll accept it. It's no problem. Like, I'll sign up for that. I'll sign up for unlimited liability. Because guess what? Like, Mikey has a lot less on the line than those giant Fortune 500 companies do. So he's willing to sign up. And honestly, like, this is a little known, but sort of best kept secret in the industry. Like, Mikey doesn't pass that risk and those terms on to the manufacturer. He assumes them all for himself. So like in a previous episode, we talked about the Dell computers.
Right.
And how, Mikey signs a contract with the state and he assumes all the risks. So if those Dell computers go sideways, you're paying for it, Russell. Like, your company, you're on the contract, you're on the hook. You're the prime contractor. You're buying those Dell laptops in an agreement on yourself, but you're willing to accept that risk to be able to make some money. The state's paying for it. They're paying for someone to assume that risk. But at the end of the day, it's a risk you're willing to take as a business in this industry.
So let's talk, neither of us is attorneys, but let's talk a little bit about how those terms and conditions come about, and then if they're different between different contracts. So does the state just publish terms and conditions and say, this is what the terms and conditions are, take it or leave it?
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, so in order to do business with the state, these are the terms and conditions. Yeah. Is it am I taking on the same terms and conditions for buying a desk as I am with a desktop versus a cloud computing service versus software?
Sure. There's different categories. At the foundation of them are the state's general terms and conditions. General being the key word. It kind of applies to everything. If you're buying SaaS, it's different than if you're buying infrastructure. If you're buying, cloud, it's different than if you're buying those other two things. But at the foundation are those sort of general terms and conditions. It's the base that every contract.
And is that where the liability risk lies?
Yes.
Okay. So that's part of the general terms and conditions. It applies across various product types.
And I can't tell you how many times, like, a small company has said, no problem, we'll just negotiate those. And I'm like, no. The state does not negotiate. I'm sorry, they don't. Like, this is it. Take it or leave it. And frankly, your entire competitive industry has taken it. Whether they're taking it directly or through a reseller, everyone signs up to them. Everyone agrees to it. It is what it is.
So how does that look? Let's just walk me through 3 different contract vehicles is where I'm thinking, but it looks one way on an enterprise technology contract. So you've got these massive contracts that are bid. It tends to be some of the largest resellers in our industry that are servicing those bids, and they're the relationship between the reseller and the manufacturer in that case is super tight.
hmm
Um, who has the risk under that scenario?
Um, whoever signs a contract is who has the risk, and the resellers are signing the contract. The manufacturers, in the case of like an enterprise technology contract, or even like the software licensing program that most of the state's
Right.
software
That's the one
purchases
I was
go
going to go
through.
to next.
Yeah, those the state is not buying directly from the software provider or the equipment provider. They are buying from the reseller, and that's where the responsibility comes to meet all the state's terms and conditions. Even, for instance, we've been talking about AI a lot on our program, and the state has a generative AI disclosure form. The manufacturer doesn't fill that out. The reseller fills it out based on the manufacturer's software or equipment. So it all falls on the
It
reseller.
all falls on the reseller. Does that, you mentioned the SLP, there's also the CMAS
hmm
contract. So when we filled out the CMAS, we have we have a CMAS contract with the state, and then we add different services and goods to that CMAS contracting process. What kinds of terms and conditions are associated with the CMAS contract, and is it any different than the enterprise contract or the
Yeah.
SLP?
So they all have that base general terms and conditions. Depending on even the specific bid, there will be other terms that are added on to it. So if I'm buying something very particular, I might want more insurance than if I'm buying something else.
Oh, so the state will take that base and then add to it. When I add the expense of the
Yeah.
bid process, it
Sometimes
can be
unnecessarily, honestly. They're like, yeah, throw it all on there. We really want to be protected. And it's like, no, this is making your bid cost so much
much more.
more.
So if an agency adds different terms and conditions, those added terms and conditions can be a subject to negotiation with the agency or department.
Yes.
Okay.
They typically in negotiations, you can discuss that stuff with them, even through like Q&A on a bid, right? Where you get to ask them questions. You can say, hey, we saw this. We can't meet that. It's going to drastically restrict your competitive landscape. Would you consider removing it? And sometimes they will. Sometimes they won't. They're convinced they need it, and it is what it is.
Can you talk, and you deal more with this, but people mistake that negotiation that happens on agency specific terms and conditions to the general terms and conditions that are not moving anywhere. So they hear about these negotiations and will just negotiate it out.
Right. And it can be confusing, right? Because there are all these different layers of T's and C's. People are getting much better about when a department puts out a bid, stating very clearly what they will negotiate and what they will not negotiate. So, 401 IT, the state's general T's and C's for IT are non-negotiable. We will not negotiate any of this stuff. We will negotiate these other things that we added. So clarity, transparency, and what is a deal breaker and what isn't is always appreciated by everybody involved.
Right. And the podcast isn't a sort of a sales pitch for your business, but I encounter this problem all the time where companies have a product, maybe they've done business in other states, and they arrive and they don't know how to answer the question, how am I going to buy you?
Right.
And they're coming to us, and we're often we want to be your SLP partner or something, and they have no idea how to do that. What's involved in negotiating with the state to arrive at an SLP agreement to get them involved? What
So, I mean,
exactly
the
that?
first thing first, they should look at those general terms and conditions. They should make sure they can even accept it, right? Like, yeah, your reseller is going to be signing, but at the end of the day, like if I'm a responsible above board company, I want to make sure like I can back my reseller up if something goes sideways. Like
Right.
I want to make sure I'm okay with a lot of those terms and conditions
This
too.
market might not be right for you if you can't accept
Exactly.
those terms.
Or like, can we just bring the state our terms and conditions? Have you heard that one before?
Yes, I
That's
have.
cute.
Yes.
No,
It does not
no,
work
you
that way.
cannot.
Does not work that way.
So, those are published online. They're super easily accessible. This is government. Everything's transparent. You
Right.
can go and look at them and read through the, 80 some pages that exist and say, like, hey, gut check here. Like, we can't comply with this as a company. We know it's a non negotiable. Maybe we should focus on another industry. So, coaching them on, hey, these are never negotiable. Like, take it or leave it. It is what it is. If you guys have a ton of problems here, you're going to love the additional terms and conditions that departments throw on this. So, coaching them through the process, even having them just be aware of the process of what is and isn't on the table for discussions comes into play quite a bit.
And then if they're a newer entrant into California and they've never done business with the state, they don't know who the players are at various state agencies. They've picked up that this SLP is important. Maybe they've read the terms and conditions online. We're just saying that would be that's not normal. But say they've done that and they arrive. They're still not there. You don't just send an email to DGS and say, hey, I'd like to be on the SLP.
Right. Hey, do you have resellers that you work with? Some people don't. Some companies have only ever sold direct.
Right.
And California and government in general doesn't really function that way. We had a whole episode on the partner ecosystem. And so learning that process and the fact that you do have to have resellers, and we should talk about who those resellers are going to be and if they're going to be invested in selling you and if they can assume the risks that all of these terms and conditions present. So there's a ton involved in it, right? Like just signing a form is like step number like -5 in being able to sell into government, and it is super complicated. So frankly, it's probably why companies like ours are in business, because we can help them do that. But it's also a public service in a lot of ways, right? Like if I see something super cool, I'm like, guys, let's find you some resellers. Government needs you.
Right.
So let's find a way. Let's find a way to look at those T's and C's and make sure you can comply with them, or you can find a reseller that can comply with them.
I refer some of our partners to other resellers, and it can be weird. Like, why are you introducing? Why are you introducing them to another reseller? And it's part of the process of dealing with the state. In order for any of us to sell, you have to have multiple partners, multiple responses, and you need a good partner ecosystem. And I'm happy to introduce folks to quality people in the industry.
I mean, that partner ecosystem are carrying the burden of the risk of doing business with the state of California. It's a big burden.
If I had a magic wand, I think the state is not well served by insisting on that risk mitigation. I don't think it's a real value add that we're adding. And again, I think it's a good chunk of my business who
Totally.
people want to lay that risk off, but I'm not sure the state is getting all of the protection they think they're paying for by adding that
For sure they're
layer.
not. Like I see a ton of value in the reseller community, but if the state thinks that when all the Dell computers explode or, all of the whole Microsoft cloud goes down, that they're going to be able to hold those companies accountable by suing the resellers, It's not there. It falls a little flat, right?
Right, right. Well, thanks for your insight into the terms and conditions and the risk mitigation strategies that the state uses. Any recommendations for companies that are interested in doing business with the state uh, and they have some concerns about the terms and conditions and maybe some of the other provisions that might be added on with state agencies? What are some resources they can go to?
So DGS actually does listening sessions quarterly, once every 6 months, probably, where they want to hear from the vendor community, from the resellers and the manufacturers, which is always interesting to get them all in the same room because they're like, where they really will walk through it and say, like, what is the risk here? Why do we need this? Why do we have it the way it is? We've both sat in the auditorium over at DGS and listened to those discussions. So they are listening. They are trying to make things better, but everyone has to remember that they are the ultimate in risk aversion.